Okay, here we are on the last of the presentations on the special senses. This one is on hearing. We'll start with the external ear, with the auricle, which collects and directs the sound waves into the external acoustic meatus, which funnels the sound to the tympanic membrane. The tympanic membrane, as you can see in the image, separates the external ear from the middle ear cavity. Within the external acoustic meatus, there are ceruminous glands embedded in the skin. These are just modified sweat glands that secrete a waxy, bitter substance that helps repel organisms and lubricate the ear canal. Once you get to the middle ear, the tympanic cavity contains three little bones that span the cavity. The auditory ossicles include the malleus attached to the tympanic membrane, the incus, and then the stapes, which sits in the opening of the oval window in the inner ear. Additionally, there's an auditory tube which helps equalize the pressure between the middle ear cavity and the throat. It opens when you swallow. So here in this view, you can see the tympanic membrane showing you the boundary line between the external ear and the middle ear. Here's the middle ear acoustic cavity, the auditory ossicles, the malleus attached to the tympanic membrane, the incus, and then the stapes hiding behind this muscle. You'll also notice that the facial nerve, branch of the facial nerve, runs right through the middle ear cavity. So vibrations of the tympanic membrane are picked up by the auditory ossicles and transmitted to the inner ear. If the vibrations are from a very loud sound, you have those two little muscles to help protect the ear from damage from excessive vibration. When you get to the internal ear consists of a bony labyrinth containing a fluid called perilymph and the membranous labyrinth, as we saw in the last presentation. The vestibule and semicircular canals are associated with equilibrium. The cochlea is associated with hearing. So we're going to follow the cochlea in this drawing, and you're going to see that the cochlear duct, the part of the membranous labyrinth that runs through the cochlea, spirals through the cochlea, matching the spirals of the bony labyrinth. That cochlear duct contains the receptors for hearing. The connections between the inner ear and the middle ear cavity are through the windows, the round window and the oval window. The oval window is connected to the stapes, so vibrations come into the inner ear at the oval window. They exit from the inner ear at the round window. So as I said, those cochlear duct receptors provide your sense of hearing. And as you'll see, the vibrations as they enter spiral through the cochlea. They're going to shortcut through the cochlea at some point and then leave through the round window. Here in this cutaway view, you can see the spiral of the cochlea. You can see it continuing. Here is the cochlear duct. The cochlear duct sits on a bony shelf. We'll look at the parts in a diagram where they're more clearly labeled. In this photomicrograph view, again, you can see that there are actually three compartments to the ear. This tiny line here indicates the upper side of the cochlear duct. So the cochlear duct is enclosed in this little triangular shaped area. So the auditory ossicles have faithfully transmitted the sound waves from the eardrum. They are going to transmit two bits of information: what is the pitch or frequency of the sound, and what is the intensity or loudness of the sound. What actually vibrates when sound waves hit the cochlear duct is the basement layer, the basilar membrane, and when that vibrates, it bends the hairs of the hair cells that are embedded in an upper membrane called the tectorial membrane. So let's take a look, and here we see the bony shelf on which the cochlear duct sits. Here's the basilar membrane. Here are the hair receptors, and this little pink flap is the tectorial membrane. This layer right here, the vestibular membrane, is the sort of the ceiling, the upper side of the cochlear duct. And here in this close-up, you can see, again, the basilar membrane is what's going to vibrate. When it vibrates, it pushes up. The hairs bend because they're embedded in the tectorial membrane. The bending of the hair cells starts a nerve impulse on the nerve fibers, running through to form the cochlear branch of the vestibulocochlear nerve. And here's a microscopic view. Here's the tectorial membrane, kind of out of place because when you make a microscope slide, it's hard to keep everything where it belongs. But here you can see the basilar membrane and the spiral organ. The hairs of these would be embedded in the tectorial membrane in a living specimen. So let's look at the qualities of sound. Again, we have pressure waves of sound. The sound is created by vibration, physical vibration of an object. It compresses the air. The molecules of air are literally compressed into waves or bands. And they form what we call a sine wave, which we'll look at in a minute. And that sine wave has two characteristics. The wavelength, how fast are the individual waves coming, and that's measured as the frequency, also known as the cycles. And the way the brain interprets that is our sense of pitch. Is it a high pitch or a low pitch? The amplitude tells you the intensity of the sound, how loud is the sound, and that's measured in decibels. So here in this diagram you can see the compressed air waves as they leave the tuning fork and hit the ear. So the wavelength is how far apart each compressed band of air is. And here you can see a graph showing you the amplitude or the loudness in addition to the wavelength or frequency. So as the sound waves hit on the stapes at the oval window, they set up vibrations within the perilymph. Those vibrations could go all the way through and out the round window. But in general, what they're going to do is they're going to shortcut through the basilar membrane. And where they shortcut through depends on the frequency. If it's a very high frequency, a high energy wave, it can shortcut through at a very early point because the hair cells at this point are quite stiff and the hairs are short and it takes a lot of energy to get these to bend. But for lower frequency, lower pitch sounds, the sound wave has to travel farther along the cochlear duct to find a point at which it can shortcut through. And depending on where along the cochlear duct the vibrations actually hit, the brain can interpret that as sound. You can think of this as kind of like a piano keyboard, with this being the high end and this being the low end of the keyboard. So here you can see a frequency that hit just at this point, and so your brain would interpret that as sort of a mid-range sound. The basilar membrane is going to vibrate up and down, and as it does, the hairs on the hair cells are going to bend, and that's going to create the nerve impulses. So kind of pulling all that together, you see the sound waves hitting the tympanic membrane, setting up vibrations in the auditory ossicles, which the stapes then transmits the sound waves into the bony labyrinth, and from there it's going to hit a particular point along the basilar membrane, and whatever point that is, your brain will interpret the pitch. So the nerve impulses are going to leave the basilar membrane. Those axons from those nerve cells come together to form the cochlear branch of the cochlear nerve, and they're going to enter the medulla oblongata and synapse at the cochlear nuclei, and we'll see what happens from there. So after leaving the medulla oblongata, one of the pathways that sound impulses will follow is to the inferior colliculi of the midbrain, and this is the center for the startle reflex, the reflex that makes you jump when you hear a loud noise. Most of the sound nerve impulses are going to pass into the thalamus, and from the thalamus they're going to get projected up into the auditory cortex of the temporal lobe. So here we see a diagram that shows if it's a high frequency sound, it hits earlier on the cochlea. If it's a lower frequency sound, it has to travel further along the cochlea. Wherever it comes from, those axons are going to join together to form the cochlear branch of the vestibulocochlear nerve. And here we are coming into the medulla. Here are the cochlear nuclei of the left and right ears for the left and right sides. From there we're going to go to the inferior colliculi for your startle reflex, but most of the impulses, remember, are going to pass right on up to the thalamus and get relayed to either the right or left auditory cortex. And it's not just a matter of interpreting the left ear on one side and the right ear on the other side. in general, interpretation of sound, because sound comes into both ears, part of that interpretation is based on whether the sound was louder on the right side of the body or the left side of the body. But part of what the processing of sound that occurs in the brain is based on whether it's considered language or music. And most people process language on the left side of the brain and music on the right side of the brain. And a third category for sound is noise. And noise tends to get filtered out either at the level of the thalamus, you just don't even recognize it at all, or it's quickly forgotten as it comes in. You may be aware of noise, but you forget about it very quickly.